Greetings. Right. We're on to props. Different view. You see this thing here. Now, the reason this is here is because I can show you what we're going to be talking about on the banners. So we're talking props today. First bit we're going to be talking about is props. We're creating a contact component, then moving on to receiving props in a component, and then this is a pun, prop quiz. This is all part of the video journal that I'm doing of my journey on the React, Learn React course on Scrimba. And the reasons why we're in this kind of view now is because on Melon, the banners there aren't working in this view. So if you watch, banner's gone. I've reported this to their tech support, so get on with it, fellas. Get it fixed. Right, this is the... See, I haven't got my banner on the screen now, so I don't know what I'm doing. I'll have to look at my fastidiously typed spreadsheet curriculum that I've created. Right, create a contact component. Give it to us, Bob. Give us some props.
To help guide us through learning the syntax of using props in React, we're going to look at this little contact book that I created here. As you can see in our app component, everything is hard-coded. Each one of these divs, which I separated with a little space in between each one, represents one of the contact cards. But of course, all of the data is hard-coded inside, which means if I ever needed to make a change, especially to something like the styling, I'm going to have to make that change to every instance of this contact card that we see here. Before we can really talk about props, though, we have a challenge for you, and that challenge is to create a separate component called contact, which, as the challenge shows, will be in a different file. And then I just want you to choose one of the contacts that we have here to move into that file. Essentially, you can just copy and paste one of these contacts over into your contact component. Then, once you've moved one of these contacts over to the contact component, I want you to import the contact component and render 4 instances of it here inside our app component. While you're working on that part of the challenge, I want you to think ahead, what's going to be the problem with doing it this way? Okay, pause the screencast and work on this challenge.
What's going to be the problem doing it this way? Well, the information is just going to be hard-coded in the contact component. It's just going to print the same thing over and over again. Is that too stupid? Let's find out. Right. Create a contact.js component in another file. Let's create another file. New file. Case number. B, but keep it consistent. Right. There's the contact.js file. Why is he not importing React DOM again? So we need that. Let's put that in there. Now, let's remember, can I remember how to create a brand new component function? Let's try it. So you need to export default function name, keyword. That's how you declare a function anyway, normal JavaScript. I think that's all we need. And just paste the and return something. Yes. Get rid of that. We can get rid of all 4. That's what he said, didn't he? Did he? Move one of the contact cards below the div into the file. Okay, let's do it one at a time. Always best just to focus on one thing and then letting your mind fly off. Didn't do a very good job of formatting that, did it? We've got any auto formatters? Any pretty fine now? Enough. He won't know it. Parent, child. Yep. Okay, that looks good. Work that in a bit. Right, have we done everything? So it's important. It's exporting. So we need to import the contact component, don't we? So import from that needs to be case sensitive. Move one or more of the contact card divs below into that file. So I'm guessing we don't need these. Music on really, or coding. Melon had an option for that. I think StreamYard did. Let's put a feature request in. Right, anyway, let's reference this component, which you do by call it by its name. No errors. Be amazed if this works first time. What's that? No, require contact modules.js. Is it that? Does that need to be a no? What have I not done? Yeah. So with from, you're importing the file name, aren't you? That would kind of make more sense if you could do that, I think. You know what I mean? It's in the same directory, so that's right. File name's right. The other one, syntax. What have I not done? Map, correct. Rendering it there. That's what I've done. In a minute. What's that doing there? Couldn't you've just put that there? Where's that exporting to then? Index.js. Yeah. Okay. I'll have a drink of wine. May inspire me. Come on, answer. I know you're in there. Why is it not important, React DOM? You only need that once then. The top level component, parent component. Maybe you do. Get rid of it, see what happens. Right, different error. Return is not defined. There we go. See, that's the value of reading error logs, people. Console log error tab is your best friend in front-end development. Right, that's printed, but only once. What did Bob want us to do again? Move one of the contact card divs into that file, import and render 4 instances of the card. Okay. Let's get 4 of these mothers. 2, 3, 4. Yes. Rendered. But as I said, all hard-coded information needs to be dynamic. See, Mr. Whiskerson has been printed 4 times. Pesky little feline. I think I've done the challenge. I think I already thought ahead, Bob. Already thought ahead. What was that ping? Right, let's go to the answer.
Okay, so I'll create a new file called contact.js, and in contact.js, we'll import React from React. We'll export default, our function contact. And for now, we're just going to copy and paste one of the contacts. Let's choose Mr. Whiskerson here. Okay, that should have been easy enough. Inside of app, we will then import contact from our contact file. And then instead of completely deleting all of these, because I think I want access to this data, I'm going to actually move them down outside of my component.
I deleted them, Bob.
That way I still have access to them, but they're out of the way.
He didn't specify there, did he? Did not specify what he wanted.
And now I'm going to render 4 instances of my contact component. If you didn't make it this far, or you didn't take the chance to think ahead what's going to be wrong with doing it this way, I want you to think now, what's going to be wrong when I create 4 instances of this contact component?
Already told you.
Well, if I hit save, we get 4 Mr. Whiskersons. And as much as we love Mr. Whiskerson, we still need the data from our other contacts here in our contact book. Why exactly is this happening? Well, when we copied one of the contacts and pasted it over, we pasted the data with it. Just like a function, let's say add 2 numbers, that takes no parameters and simply returns a hard-coded amount, in this case 1 plus 2, every time we call this function, it will always give us the same result. In the same way, our contact card has that data embedded inside of it, or hard-coded in it, and therefore it's going to show up every time we make an instance of that component. Now, similar to how we instead will usually pass some parameters to a function which make it more flexible and reusable, I can say return a plus b, and now suddenly I have an infinite number of possibilities with this function because all I need to do when I'm calling it is pass in the real values that I want this function to use. We can do essentially the exact same thing in React.
Ooh.
The remainder of this screencast is going to be focused on how we pass data into our contact component. And in the next screencast, we're going to look at how we can consume that data from our contact component so that we get back to a working state where we have 4 different contacts in our contact book. Let me delete this function. We'll go back to app.js and focus
Shit is going to get wild.
Here on our instances of the contact component. Just like we talked about how HTML allows us to pass attributes which can alter the behavior of the element, React chose to do things in a very similar way. However, in HTML, where we are limited to using only the attributes that are allowed for any given element, for example, I couldn't pass a whatever I want attribute to a link tag because that's not defined in the HTML spec. With React, because this is a custom component, I can pass in any property or attribute that I want. We have 4 pieces of data in each one of our contact cards that we need to pass down to our instances of the contact component. So to do that, I can add an image prop, or let's call it IMG. This image prop can be the value of the path to the image. So I'll go ahead and copy that from Mr. Whiskerson here. Again, in the next lesson, we'll be learning how to actually consume these properties that we're passing in. But for now, we're just going to be dedicated to adding these properties to the contact component on our instances. Now, the upcoming challenge might be something that you decide you really hate me for giving to you. I'm going to do one more of these props, and then I will update our challenge to give you a chance to practice typing out your own props to each one of these contact cards. I'm going to put this on its own line because I already know I'm going to be adding a bunch of these. The next piece of data that I'll need in each one of my components is a name. So let's choose to call it name. I'll come down here and just copy Mr. Whiskerson's name and pass it in. And this is the point at which I'll update this challenge for you. Okay, once again, I promise I'm not doing this to be mean, but I do want you to do a little bit of busy work, mostly just to get your hands on the keyboard and start practicing what it's like to add your own props to this contact component. Remember, we get to decide what we call these props. We could call this whatever we want, but of course that's going to be more confusing, so I'll stick with name. The other 2 pieces of data we still need to pass down are the phone number and the email. So finish up the first contact first by adding a phone and email prop, and then I want you to fill out all the data for the remaining 3 contacts with the image, name, phone, and email props. All of the data, of course, can still be found here, so you'll have a bit of copying and pasting to do. Pause the screencast and add the rest of our props to our contacts.
Don't worry about it, Bob. I can handle this. I'm not a pussy. See what I did there? Right, Mr. Whiskerson, what have we got? We've got your image, we've got your name, we need your phone number, don't we? Okay, phone number. Phone. I wonder if props have to have camel casing or what. Let's leave this phone for now. Oh God, really? Quarter to 11. It's been a hot day today here in the UK. Right, let's nick this data. So let's put the phone number prop in there. What else do we need? Email. Email. Old. Email. Where's the email then? Mr. Whisk as. Mr. Whiskerson must be down with the kids because he's abbreviating his name with a Z at catnap.meow. Wonder if meow's even a TLD. Top level domain. I'm getting like Bob, aren't I, using fancy words when I shouldn't be. Hypocrite. Right, that's Mr. Whiskerson done. Balls to copying all that out again, so let's copy and paste it. That's, do we need that? So I'm going to do, because I'm lazy, I would rather not highlight and delete this every time. So I'm just going to copy that. Out of life, heavy pasting some code and it doesn't indent properly. Right. So that's Mr. Whiskerson done. Let's you go to who's next? Which of our feline friends is next? I've got a cat actually, he's called Mike. Ginger Pussy. Who's next then? Fluffykins. Into the image prop. Fluffykins name. Into the name prop. The contact component. Phone. How's a cat got a phone number? Got a dial. Where he charges it in. Fluffme.com. Oh, I must apologise for yawning on these videos. I like doing this at night before I go to bed. I tend to take things in better at night. I kind of don't like sitting in front coding all day. So do it day to day. More of a night owl. Felix next. I'm getting bored of this already. Bob was right. Felix. Felix is the cat at hotmail.com. Finally. Pumpkin. That's Pumpkin's name. What's his phone number? 0800 Cat King. This always used to be a bit of a head scratcher for me. How come all these in America they have like things like that? How can you dial names? I remember Mr. Plow on The Simpsons. You have to dial Plow or something to get him. I was like, well, how can you dial Plow? Right. Well, I've done that. Now what? Now what, Bob? We need to change the component, I guess. I've done the challenge, I think.
Okay,
Or have
hopefully
I?
that wasn't too painful for you, and hopefully you got a good sense of what it's like to add props to React components.
I've just realised the sound is coming out of the computer, not the AirPods. Oh,
I'll finish up
there
this
we go.
first contact
Right, so you basically won't have heard anything of Bob. You'd have just heard me. But CBA doing all this again. You get the gist.
together, and then I'll probably skip over the rest. So let's add a phone prop here. I can just come down and copy Mr. Whiskerson's phone number, and we'll add an email prop as well, and we'll copy this as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish up these contacts, but I'll skip over that so you don't have to watch me monotonously copying and pasting the data from below. Okay, that wasn't so bad, was it? At this point, I can come down and get rid of this old version that we have here, just to clean things up a little bit. I'll also clean up our challenge. And at this point, you probably can see that things are a lot more organized. Sure, we still have a good number of lines of code here, but the data is the primary focus. We can see exactly what data we're passing into our contact component, and then our contact component contains the specific display logic on how the data should be used. Of course, at this point, we haven't made any changes to the contact component. So if I hit refresh, what do you think will happen?
F all.
Well, hitting refresh won't change anything.
Error.
We're still going to have 4 instances of Mr. Whiskerson, because essentially what we have now is a function like our add to numbers that takes parameters A and B, but still is returning hard-coded data. So even if we call add to numbers, or let's say, yeah, let's call this numbers, and we pass in 5 and 10, it doesn't really matter at this point that we're passing in 5 and 10 because the body of the function is still returning hard-coded numbers. So in the next screencast, let's see how we can make use of the properties that will be passed into this component so we can get back to a place where we have our 4 different instances of our contact card.
Okay, that wasn't too hard, was it? I was getting a bit worried about this magical word of props. Like it was some sort of black magic or something. But fairly straightforward. Don't know what the big deal is. Right, should we move on to the next lesson? Yes, let's. Which will be receiving props in a component. And it doesn't work in this view, the banners. There you go. It's magically come back on there. Receiving props in the component. So I guess what's going to happen now is you're just going to change the component so it receives these props into the component and then spits them out. Right, let's get cracking. How do I get the view back? Double click me. You get that. As soon as you change to that view, the banner goes. Get it fixed, Melon. Get it fixed. I'll send Bob round to get you. You won't like that. Anyway, next bit. Let's go.
In the last lesson, we learned about how to pass values into our components using a very similar syntax that we're already used to with attributes in HTML. In React, we don't call these attributes, we actually call them properties, or usually for short, just props. Unfortunately, it's very easy to get the data that we're passing into our components inside of our component itself. Right here, just like a function that takes parameters, I'm going to put the word props. In truth, I could call this whatever I want. In fact, I'll show you exactly what happens. I'm going to console log what we called whatever, and let me make a little room here, open the console, and hit save. Now, 4 things got logged to the console. I want you to think for a second, why did it console log 4 times?
Because the instance was referenced 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. That looks like an object to me. It's a cat object. But it's passing in these props. Remember in JSX, he says JSX merely outputs objects. Let's go back into contact. What's he doing there? Right, so yeah, you just console logging each object. It's been called 4 times. It's console logging 4 of the cat objects. That's why.
It console logged 4 times because I have 4 contact instances. Every time React rendered one of my contacts, it ran the console log line inside of the code of that component. And if you look closely, you'll see that we have 4 properties in that console. Let me copy one of them out here so I can actually reference it. We got 4 properties here. If I clean these up each onto their own line, you can see that what we received, what we're calling whatever, is an object that has properties that match exactly with what we put here as our prop inside of the component here. Let's see what happens if I maybe change img to something like the whole word of image. Again, I can change these to whatever I want them to be. So now when I hit save, if you look down below, the first item is receiving an object that now has an image property all spelled out, whereas all the other ones are still receiving an img property. Anyway, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too much, so let's come up here and change whatever to props, because props is what you'll usually be calling this. And at this point, I want you to pause the screencast and see if you can figure out how to use this object that has all of the properties we want to update our component. This one's going to take some critical thinking, but I want you to really think through it, see if you can figure out how to essentially make it so that our components are not for instances of Mr. Whiskerson, but rather have the correct data and images displaying here. Let me type that out as a real challenge. Okay, there's your challenge. Pause the screencast and see if you can make it so that essentially we finish this little contact book where each one is its own separate contact. Pause now.
Right. So we need to reference in there. So I'll log back out. Piss off. What? What do you mean, unknown error? What have I done? Right. Let's log out that. Log the props out again. Right. How did he minimize that? Okay. He's been pissing around there with that. I'm going to change that back. Right, so I need to reference that prop name. These have all got quotes around, does that matter? So I need to reference that prop name in that bit of data, I think. Do you need the quotes? Do you need the quotes? So how to reference a prop. So it's like a key value pair. I'll Google it. How to reference a prop value in JSX. I'm just Googling it. Right. So you take the name of the object and then the property name. So it'll be, I'll just cut and paste this from the internet. So it'll be I'm going to call this cats. And then image. I wonder, is this going to work? No. What's the error? The error occurred in contact component. Does it need that? Nope. Just Googling again. Okay, object entries is another way to extract the numbers of key value pairs from the props object. Let's call it props again. Let's go back. Too tired, can't be arsed reading it. You just tell me, Bob.
Pause now and work on this challenge. Well, if props is an object and I can access the values of that object by using props dot, for example, name, props dot image, then all I really should have to do is update this hard-coded data, for example, the name here, to curly braces props dot name. Of course, if I didn't put the curly braces in there, it would literally interpret the text props dot name, and then all of the names would say props dot name. When I surround it with curly braces, awesome. My names are changing. Obviously, nothing else has changed.
That's what I did.
So let's go ahead and do the rest. I'll start with these easy ones. We'll get props.phone and props.email. Okay, the phone and email are coming through correctly. Now the image. This one may have been a little bit trickier for you, but simply all I'd have to do is erase the entire source, including the quotation marks, and put my JavaScript here. Because the value that's coming in through props.image, or img, is already a string, it's going to fill in the string value for my source. I hit save, and there's all of my values. But here's a bug. I introduced this when I was teaching the concept. Hopefully this was a good chance for you to do some debugging. If you didn't, I want you to see if you can figure out why the picture for Mr. Whiskerson is not coming in. Pause the screencast and try to fix this bug.
Not space. No. Because it needs to go back again. No, it's there. Don't know. You tell me. Too tired, too late. Something to do with the file
right
path.
Here for our image source, we're assuming that we're receiving a prop called img. Back in app.js, however, I did change this to image. So I'll change this back to img, hit save, and now the photo for Mr. Whiskerson is coming in just fine. Now, I hope I'm not belaboring the point. Understanding props is one of the most crucial things that you can do in React when you're learning. So yes, we've spent a lot of time covering props. However, you will use props every single day of your React life. So this is a really big milestone. If you feel like you've understood everything in React that we've talked about so far, you should really congratulate yourself, pat yourself on the back, and probably at this point, take a little break. Don't try to bite off too much more than you can chew. And I do want to show you a little cool trick that we can do with our props here in the next screencast.
Well, the prop quiz is only 4 minutes, isn't it? So we'll do it. Change the banner. Not updated. Change it to this view. There it is. Stupid. We've got the prop quiz coming up. May as well just get on with it, eh? Oh, it stayed on there. Banner stayed on. All right, let's do the prop quiz and then knock it on the head.
Okay, it's time to give you a prop quiz. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. Like before, your task is to read through each of these questions, to actually click into the editor and type down your answers. Don't forget, in Scrimba, if you have any changes that you make to the code, you can always save it as a note so that you have access to it later. You can even record your own voice talking over the top of the note if you wanted to keep an audio note. And all of those are saved here in your account on Scrimba. So pause now, answer the questions through this quiz, and then you can hit play and we'll go through the quiz together.
What was he on about then? Creating an audio note?
Your own voice talking over the code. You can always save it as a note so that you have access to it later. You can even record your own voice talking over the top of the note if you wanted to keep an audio note. And all of those are saved here in your account on Scrimba. So pause now, answer the questions through this quiz, and then you can hit play and we'll go through the quiz together.
What the frig is he on about? Audio note. Well, I'm recording this anyway, aren't I? On here. What do props help us accomplish? They allow us to add dynamic data to a component so it's not hard coded all the time, which like a broken pencil would be utterly pointless. How do you pass a prop into a component? You declare the property in called key value pair. And all right, you declare the property. Let's call it a prop. The prop within the instance. the calling the instance of the component. Do all that crap, do we? By the prop within the calling of the instance. So it's like when you're calling a function, it's like a parameter. Don't need that again. Don't have gibber on me when I write. It's a load of babbling crap. You declare the prop within the calling of the instance of the component, and then you pass it in the function parameter. Which passes it. Oh, you know what I mean. 3. How do I pass a custom prop? Blah blah blah. To a native DOM element. What? Don't know. 4. How do I receive props in a component? Okay. So you declare name of the prop by value. That's right, but you know what I mean. Prop object. Car prop. Engine size. That object-oriented stuff. Yeah. Bollocks engine scene. Color. Fuck it. Color. What data type is props when the component receive it? It's an object. Easy. If I'm right. I didn't really understand what he meant on that. I'm too tired to think now.
Number 1, what do props help us accomplish? Well, just like parameters being passed into a function, props being passed into a component help us make that component more reusable. As you become more and more experienced in React, you'll realize that there are times when it makes a lot of sense to pass props into a component so that it's reusable, and other times when it might be possible to pass props into a component, but it's just not always necessary. I can't tell you how much time I have spent trying to create a component that's very reusable and then ended up only using it 1, maybe 2 times. That's just one of those things that will come with experience as you write more and more React code. Remember, when we pass props into a component, it could be data that actually gets displayed as a part of that component, or it could sort of be like metadata that you're passing into the component that in a way configures it to act a certain way. Either way, it helps us make any component that we create more reusable so that we can keep our code as dry as possible. Okay, so number 2, how do you pass a prop into a component? In the same way that you pass attributes to HTML elements, like a source attribute for an image, you essentially do the same thing when you're passing props to a component. So if I have my own component like, let's say, my awesome header, I'm using a strange name just to make it very clear that this is a custom one. You can pass a prop of your own choosing, like maybe title, into that component. That brings us to number 3. Can I pass a custom prop, like, for example, blah, 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 to a native DOM element? So, for example, a div with a lowercase d. Well, the answer is no. So we come to the next part. Why not? And that's because under the hood, when React sees a regular HTML element that we're trying to render, we express that element through the JSX syntax, and that JSX syntax actually returns an object, and the object describes the actual DOM node that should be created. When we add an attribute to a regular DOM element like a lowercase d div, the object that this JSX creates is expecting to be able to add this property to the DOM element. And since DOM elements don't have an attribute called blah, 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 I can't just choose the props that I want to add to native DOM elements like this div. So let me try typing out a summary of that. So the answer is no, because the JSX that we use to describe those native DOM elements we want React to create will eventually be turned into real DOM elements.
Right, we get it.
Real DOM
Move on.
elements don't
Yeah.
have whatever properties, let's say properties, or attributes specified in the HTML specification, which, as we all know, doesn't include properties like blah, blah, blah. Okay, I think we understand that concept. How do I receive props in a component? Simply enough, the parameters to that component function will receive a value called props, which of course we could name whatever we want, but by very strong convention will be props. And that leads us to the last question, which is what data?
Got that wrong, didn't I? Didn't really read the question properly. How do I receive props in a component? I was printing the data of the props, wasn't I? Learn to read the questions properly, John. I used to do that in exams at school. I'd be halfway through writing the answer and then think, shit, I've not read it properly. So I only got C's and everything.
Data type is props in the component when I receive it. This parameter, which we're calling props, is an object, which means if I want to access the properties of that object, I use dot syntax. So props dot whatever the prop was that I passed in.
Dot notation, I think you'll find it's called. Robert, dot notation or object notation. See, I've out buzzworded you there.
Passed in. Let's use blah, 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 because that's what we said before. Okay, awesome job on that quiz. If you struggled with any of these questions, of course, don't hesitate to go back and review the things that we've recently learned. And when you're ready, let's move on.
Right, I think I'm done for the day. That wasn't too hard, actually, or too daunting, or too scary. I think I've got a good grasp of that. And we're finally at the point of all this React course. How many lessons are we in? Have I done? I've done 29 in the first section, 30 odd, 35 lessons in, and I can now understand what's the point of using React. On that note, I'm going to spin my pencil a bit more and bid you good evening. What have we got next coming up? Deconstructing props, more props practice. It's going to be a bit of a prop fest on this channel. So I bet you can hardly wait. Move that out of the way. Move my keyboard to the mouse. Say goodbye in a comedic way. Bugger off.